Well, everyone, we're back again for another Canadian immigration podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Alicia Backman-Beharry. How are you, Alicia?
I'm doing well, Mark. I thought that we would try to tackle these persistent issues, the things that we always get questions about, and one of them for express entry is always police clearances.
Absolutely. You know, we've covered a lot of different things in our podcast. This being episode 159, we decided to make a little shift. I think personally, we've covered as much ground as we possibly can, I think, on the Time's Up series. Now, there may be things, guys, that will pop up that directly affect all of you who are running out of time and are wondering what the options are and what you need to do. And I think that series is still alive. But given the emphasis on express entry with our current government, given the fact that they have pulled back actually more economic permanent resident spots or allocations to the express entry regime, whether that's the category based draws that they do, or whether it's the in Canada draws, they have pulled them back from the provincial nominee programs and expanded that a little bit. So those of you who are here, the vast majority are still going to have your options through express entry. And despite how frequently people talk about express entry, despite how much information is out there online, we still see the same common problems and mistakes that people make that cause their applications to be returned as incomplete or outright refused. And never before, Alicia, have we been in a situation where people do not get a second chance. And so the purpose of the Express Entry Getting It Right series is literally to help you guys make sure you do not fall into the same trap that so many of the people that book consultations with us are falling into. So when we start off here, Alicia, with our police clearance certificates, we're going to go right to the source and we're going to show you right on the government website. But just as an introduction, Alicia, maybe you can just kind of educate people on why they ask for these in the first place. Like, why are police clearance certificates important? Like, what purpose do they serve in the express entry context? And I'll also qualify everyone that we are focused exclusively on the requirements for police certificates within the express entry system. There are slight modifications sometimes to what the expectations are with other immigration applications, but at this stage, this is all about express entry and getting it right.
Mm-hmm. And so express entry really is looking at not only the principal applicant, but also the family members. And so if there is inadmissibility, criminal inadmissibility, then that's something that they are going to be checking through those police clearances. And they will check to make sure that there isn't a history of charges, arrests, detentions, criminal convictions in other countries. And so they are looking at what is a person's history. And like I mentioned, it's not just the principal applicant, but it's also the family members. And so we have, of course, seen variations where you have, breakdown in marital relationships and you have kids who are over the age of 18 and the other spouse doesn't want to let them be part of the application and doesn't want to let them have their police clearances as part of the principal applicant. So there are things that can definitely complicate your application, but the general reason why immigration wants this is to make sure that nobody's inadmissible who's going to be coming on their permanent residency through express entry.
And it probably makes sense for me to even share an example, a real life example, so people understand. Now, this example I'm going to share is not in the context of express entry. It was a spousal sponsorship application, but we had a lady who was being sponsored by her Canadian citizen spouse, and she did have a dependent child. And remember, dependency ends at 22. But if you're 18 to 21, you're a dependent child and you're required to provide a police clearance certificate in similar or like fashion to minor dependent children who, have the requirement of obtaining immigration medicals, which we will definitely cover as well in a future express entry getting it right episode. But in this case, the mother was in Canada. There had been a lengthy time for processing. And I think we're now starting to see those processing times start to climb up. But in this case, I think it was 2 years for processing this application. It was literally at the final stages. When she submitted the application, her son in this case was 19. And the police clearance certificate, when it was requested, it came to light that he got himself a DUI, her son, when he was 21. And he was literally 3 months, I think, Alicia, away from, well, yeah, probably, I think about 3 months away from his 22nd birthday when we got this procedural fairness letter and this request to obtain police clearance certificate. And I tried with all my might. I said, look, if you just delay a few months, this kid is no longer going to be inadmissible. Don't make us have to refile the whole application. And guess what happened, Alicia?
You had to
Yep,
refile.
they did. They made us refile because that overage dependent that was 21 years old, he was criminally inadmissible to Canada because of the DUI, which then made his mother, who was, he was a dependent on his mother's application, even though he wasn't coming to Canada at
Yeah.
all. But in the context of a permanent resident application, this is a reality. So this is why we're so, immigration, they treat this very, very seriously. And individuals who want to come to Canada have to be medically and criminally inadmissible, or admissible, I should say. And so that's the why. But now, Alicia, let's jump to the who. So who needs a police certificate in the context of express entry? And guys, this is right from the government website. We'll build off it, add our own little thoughts, but this is the foundation because there's no regulation, right, Alicia? No provision within the Act or regulations that specifically state the parameters upon which someone needs to provide it, other than in most cases, if you're 18 years of age or older, you need to do it. But the rules are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And so policy-wise for express entry, this is where we're saying, yes, it's you, it's whoever the principal applicant is, whoever has that express entry profile, but it's also your family members. And this is where it can get complicated, who are 18 years or older. And so not only the principal applicant, but spouses as well as children who are 18 years or older. So this is something that's important. And then, of course, in express entry, they start asking you about who's your family member. And so if it's, and they talk about kids and they talk about stepkids and they talk about, kids from prior marriages or half siblings who are your children. So it is important to look at the marital relationship to try to figure out who needs to go get these police certificates, who's over the age of 18, and who can be your child or stepchild. And then that's who. And then
Yeah.
now the timing is the big issue as well.
Yeah. So if we look at this, you guys, obviously you can see that the time frame, the last 10 years, is kind of unique to express entry. Now, there are some applications now, I think, that also kind of limit it to 10 years. But generally speaking, it's 18 years or so nothing before 18 or this 10-year period. And then 6 months in a row or longer. And I'll give you a little bit of history on this. In the early days of express entry, they did not list it as being 6 months in a row. It was cumulative. In other words, you would have to track each of the individual days in the country in which you'd spent time to determine if collectively, if you added those all up, they would equate to 6 months within the last 10 years. And so if you're looking at old, you guys love to go online, you love to look at all of the old websites and everything sharing information on express entry. And very often I see individuals with outdated information saying you need to provide copies of both passports or everything you have with all the stamp pages. And the reason that they did that was because in the early days, that's what IRCC would request if they suspected someone had spent more than 6 days, more than 6 months cumulatively. And why was that an issue? Because if the person did not properly add up the days and did not then in turn obtain a police clearance certificate, they would refuse express entry applications because people didn't provide a police certificate when it was required. And so a number of years back, they decided, well, that's a stupid rule. I definitely put my 2 cents in how stupid it was. And now it is 6 months in a row or longer. So Alicia, maybe you can just touch on like the countries. When it comes to countries, it's not like any country is exempt that you've lived in from needing to provide a police certificate. But if you have lived 6 months in a row or more, and we always ask people, if you're living in that country right now, get a police clearance certificate. Because you can see after you apply, an officer may ask for additional for any time in your life since you're 18 years. So they can. We don't tell our clients to go back and get them to, every country, if it was older than 10 years. We don't. But if it's a country where you currently live, absolutely, go get it, because they can always come back, and application processing times right now, they're about 5 to 6 months, but as it stretches longer, it just saves time just to go and get it and have it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Alicia, on this whole kind of the temporal aspects of these police clearance certificates? Because this is where people get tripped up all the time, and we will get into these, you guys. We will, as part of our topic, one of the things that we're going to talk about here, the requirements we're going through right now, but we're going to talk about common errors. We're going to talk about practical tips, and then I definitely want to share real life scenarios. So going back to our discussion here on the temporal aspects of this, Alicia. So what have you seen happening, and what's the best way to explain to the listeners the pitfalls that that arise?
Yeah, and it is helpful that they give these examples. So in the IRCC page, they say, okay, look, if you stayed somewhere for 8 months before you turned age 18, the system's not going to ask you for your place certificates. You should be okay. Then they give another example. What if, you were over the age of 18, but it was 20 years ago where you stayed somewhere? And they said, look, the system's not going to ask, but the caveat is they could. The IRCC officer could come back and
Mhm.
say, you know what, we're a little bit worried that there could have been something where you might have broken the law those 20 years ago, and we want to get proof of what happened while you were in that country. And
Mhm.
then this is the other one that you were talking about, Mark, was,
Exactly. The one that
what
they
if
changed policy, right? They actually changed the policy on this one.
Mhm. What if you have like multiple visits where you keep going back to a country where you used to reside, for example? And then this is where, okay, well, let's take a look. Was it within the last 10 years? Is it adding up to 6 months or more in a row? And if it's not, then technically you don't need to. But here's where I have found there to be issues. Many people get confused when they are filling out their address history, their personal history, and their work history. And
Yeah.
so between those three things, sometimes they will put as their address somewhere with it where they had like their mail going. Right? So maybe they have a family member that lives in that country and they just continuously put that on there, even though they were bouncing around at different colleges or universities and traveling to different places. And then the system is going to say, well, give us a police certificate. And they're like, oh, no, no, no. I actually traveled back and forth and it didn't add up to 6 months. But if they've incorrectly, or if they have not literally put where their head was on the pillow at night is how I normally say it, and they've just put like their mailing address for a continuous period, that can cause all sorts of issues with police certificate requests.
And I'll give another example. When you're, say, studying in by correspondence, is how IRCC describes it. You're obtaining a degree virtually from another country. And when you're
Hmm.
completing that information, especially in the personal history section, it asks where that study took place. And often people will say, well, I was taking an accounting designation from the UK, from India, and so I put the location of study as being India because that's where the school is. Well, when you do that, then people are surprised to look in their document checklist that is asking for a police clearance certificate from the UK. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. What happened there? Well, there are instructions that tell you to list where you are living and the place where you're doing it remotely, your home, as the location of study, and not that of the UK. And that's how you eliminate that problem. But people are quite surprised to see that. So, just to clarify, everyone, depending on how you answer the questions, the system should trigger which countries you need to provide police clearances for. However, there is clear indication, and if I slip over here to the program delivery instructions for the officers, I think you guys have all seen this, and those of you who have subscribed to my Express Entry Accelerator program, I have all these links in there. But if we go here, I'm just going to jump down to police clearances here. You will see that that there is. I'm just trying to find the spot where it talks about this. These are the specific instructions for the officer, and it says right here in the very first paragraph, if you read this. However, it is always at an officer's discretion to request a new or additional police certificate from the applicant, but it also contemplates that applicants may also provide additional police certificates in the letter of explanation field. So you'll remember in the document checklist, or those of you who have not yet gotten there, Once you got your ITA, you've completed your EAPR, that second step, all the information, it then generates the document checklist for you. And so in this situation, it is contemplating a situation where maybe the system isn't pulling it up or catching it. But guess what, you guys? Notwithstanding that, you still have the obligation to be proactive and ensure that you are, if you're captured by, one of these things, that you are providing the police clearance certificate, because it's only how you answer your questions that
Right.
the system will trigger it. And if you make a mistake in answering your question, but then IRCC says, wait a minute, based on what we can see from the other parts of your application, you need a police clearance from here, they can literally refuse your application. And do they do that in this day and age, Alicia? Yeah,
All the time.
they
All the time.
absolutely do.
And so this is where, okay, the next question is where? Which countries, right?
Mhm.
And so if you scroll down on this page, okay, you need police certificates. There is a link and it goes through the different countries. The problem with this too is that even when you go to that link and you go to the drop down and you select your country, this is not always up to date. And so sometimes I've had clients come back to me and say, wait a minute,
Yep.
I've contacted that specific agency that's supposed to be managing police certificates in my country, and they say, their policy and procedure is different than what is on the IRCC webpage. And this is
Mhm.
where then you need to drill down and get a little bit more certainty. And you probably do need to do letters of explanation and say, look, here's what the IRCC webpage says for my country. Here's what the authorities in my country say is the process. Here's what
Yeah.
the document looks like. I've had situations where IRCC says the name of the document is a
Yeah.
different kind of translation than what the original country says it is. So
Yeah.
in those situations, be really careful if there is a discrepancy because you will need to put a letter of explanation about that.
Yeah. And if I was to highlight, we'll just go quickly through here. So I just chose Belgium just randomly as a country. This name of the document is a key indicator that you're on the right track, So if your document does not say from Belgium, Central Criminal Record, and it doesn't specifically list it just like this, then you have to understand you need to ask further questions. Okay, has there been a change? Have I somehow gotten a local or one for just the local city where I live versus a national one that meets IRCC requirements? So it will always key on the name, then how to get the police certificate. It gives instructions if you live in Belgium, if you live outside Belgium. Some countries have different instructions if you are a citizen of that country or a non-citizen. And generally speaking, they'll give you links that you can go to. So at the very beginning, you'll also see it says, do I need to provide a police clearance for permanent residence? The answer here for Belgium is yes. But what does that mean, Alicia? Why do they have that specific thing? And while you're explaining that, I'll slide over to, say, Mexico, maybe?
All right. And so some countries, if you are a permanent resident of that country, then you definitely need to give your police clearance as well. And so that is what they're asking about, citizenship and permanent residence. So those are the instructions that are going to tell you, all right, what do I need to get depending on my status in that country? So, and absolutely, there are things that now become really problematic depending on your country. So, Mexico, the UK, Australia, these are always things where there are wrinkles on police
Yes.
certificates that can really trip people up.
You bet. And if you see here for Mexico, it says when to get the police certificate. So it doesn't have that same question, do you need it? Yes. But it says you don't need to provide a police certificate with your visa application. Why? Because they just don't trust the authorities not to be corrupt, essentially. So they want to manage that process and work with you directly to make sure that the police clearance certificate you're getting is accurate and that it's not obtained, this clear police clearance certificate through a bribe or something like that. And I know, whether that's the ultimate reason, Canada just doesn't have full faith in allowing an individual to make the request on their own. So they give separate instructions. So watch for that because some won't need it up front. And then in those circumstances, you'll just I literally copy this and upload it into the spot where the police clearance certificate is requested. And then I tell them that, we'll wait further instructions from you as per your own guidelines. Okay. But they're all the same. And then remember special considerations. There may be special considerations as well, like Alicia talked about. Australia has the need for traffic reports. So in addition to the national police clearance certificate, they also want to get traffic reports, because that's where DUI show up and things like that. And so always pay attention, read everything all the way down to the bottom in here, and don't just take it for granted that if you go to this location that it's going to give you exactly what you need. All right. So pay attention to that. Okay, let's shift and let's talk about some, and I think we've done a pretty good job, to tell you the truth, about some of the common errors and practical tips. One that I want to point out, Alicia, is the specific instructions on the government website when it comes to what you need to provide. And you can see here, like we talked about, for the current country, for the applicant's current country of residence, it must have been issued no more than 6 months before the submission of the EAPR. So if a person is in their current country of residence and the police clearance certificate is older than 6 months, what happens, Alicia, if a person doesn't catch that?
Yeah, then your application is going to get returned as incomplete. And they are merciless about this. And they literally say this in the completeness check instructions. So applications that do not include a full police certificate will be refused, right? They will be rejected as incomplete. It says that at the bottom underneath those bullet points. They basically don't give you a second chance. They don't give you time to provide a new police clearance. They literally return your entire application. You've lost that invitation to apply. You would have to go back into the pool and start all over again. And you might not have a CRS that's going to actually give you a new invitation to apply.
Yeah.
So basically, if you are currently in a country, make sure that you have an up-to-date police certificate that's less than 6 months old from whatever country it is you're currently residing in. And this is where they break it down on the Express Entry police certificate page, where they say there's 2 sets of rules. One is for the country where you currently live, and then the other is for any other country. And so if you scroll down on the
I've
main
got to
page, how
go
to get a
back
police
one more
certificate.
here.
Yeah,
Here we
yeah.
go.
And if you scroll down to there, so when must the certificate be issued? And so this is now a big problem as well. So when, for the country where you currently live, that police certificate cannot be older than 6 months old. For any other country where you used to live for 6 months or more in a row within the last 10 years and since age 18, then this becomes a little bit more complex as well, because some countries put expiry dates on their police certificates. So let's say I lived in the UK while I was a student, and that was within the last 10 years, and I lived there for more than 6 months in a row. And let's say I got a police certificate before, like right after I left the UK, but it was like 2 years ago. Can I use that police certificate? And the answer should be yes, because even though that police certificate is older than 6 months old, as long as it was issued after the time that I last lived in the UK for 6 months or more in a row, it should still be okay, unless I've gone back to the UK for 6 months or more in a row. So this is where a lot of people get really worried, and they fail to kind of cross-check, what is the date? What's the date that that police certificate was issued, and what is the last date that I was physically in that country?
And if we look at this as we're going through all of this, you'll see that, like Alicia said, if anything is off, they will just flat out reject it. And so there is a provision if for whatever reason you're struggling to get a document, and through no fault of your own, you've done everything you can, including requested as soon as possible. In exceptional circumstances, if you've got your invitation to apply, you have 60 days, and the country where you're getting it from requires more than 60 days to process, there is a mechanism in place to provide evidence that you've requested it as soon as you possibly can, but still it's discretionary. So Alicia and I always advise our clients, and this is a tip, to start as early as possible with these police clearance certificates. If it's the country where you currently reside, well, in those situations, it has to be valid for 6 months, or it can't be older than 6 months. So you don't want to do it too far in advance. But for any country that you haven't lived in for a long time, don't intend to go back to, get them now. Because like Alicia indicated, the ability, even if it says that the police certificate has expired by the police, as long as it was issued after the last time you stayed there, it's not going to expire. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Alicia.
The only thing on this that I have seen happen is that people decide to get their police certificate 3 days or a week
Oh, before
before
they
they
leave.
leave their country.
Yep.
And this is something that constantly trips people up. A police certificate that's issued a week or 5 days or one day before you've left the country is not valid. Immigration is literally going to come back and say, you could have committed a crime in that one day. This application is going to be returned as incomplete because your police certificate was issued before the day you last left that country. So that is something to be aware of.
Watch it. And just back on the topic of I can't get it in time before my ITA is going to expire, you have to understand that your explanation of best efforts, and once again, they've highlighted here on the government website, not a guarantee of acceptance. So if you can't get it, then your explanation should explain the delay and what's the issue with the country. But also, the uploaded documents must, it's not may, must show that the applicant requested the certificate as soon as possible after receiving their invitation. So if you wait for like 6 weeks after you get your ITA and then you make the police clearance request, an officer is going to look much less favorably on their discretion and utilizing their discretion than if an individual literally made the request the day after they got their ITA. So keep that in mind when it comes to these police clearance certificates. Now, Alicia, I want to plow through. We've kind of covered the high points of this. We know that you have to pay attention to the country and read every single thing on the government website to make sure you're doing it properly. And then if there is some inconsistency, you're going to cross-check it and make sure that you're not missing anything. I want to share with everyone the Express Entry course, and there's a link in the description below. I have a special lesson just for police clearance certificates. And lots of people will ask, well, what is my police certificate? How do I know if I've got the right one? Well, one thing I have built into here is a nice little database of police clearance certificates that I've accumulated over the last, 10 years for a number of the most common countries. And so this is all in here and it's accessible for those who subscribe to the Express Entry Accelerator Masterclass. All right, so if we slide back once again to the instructions here, you need to pay attention and make the request as soon as possible. But Alicia, let's wrap up quickly with just some of our other practical tips. So we've talked about starting early. We've talked about country-specific instructions. Using accredited agencies is on the list. And this is a new one that we've brought up thanks to our colleague, Igor Kryliuk, who just went through the IAD challenging a refusal of a spousal sponsorship because they had used an agency that theoretically was accredited in South Africa, I believe, but there appeared to be some form of fraud. At least that's what the officer thought in the course of obtaining it. And so they weren't sure if the police clearance certificate was actually valid or real. And it literally, they refused the application and the clients had to go, they had to appeal the decision, which Igor did a masterful job in presenting it. And it was successful. And so obviously a delightful result for the clients. But what the lesson learned was, you have to be careful using different agencies. And I remember I had a client who needed a police clearance certificate from Iraq years ago. He'd worked on a U.S. base there, but he was not actually military. He was a contracted civilian as a heavy-duty mechanic. And so he had to get one. And we had to be very careful because there was a formal process through Iraq, the embassy in Ottawa, that actually required him to pay a handler in Iraq to go make the request. And I was really nervous that, this was some kind of a sham system, but the Government of Canada website directed us to follow that path. So we did, but be really careful. Other issues, Alicia, that we want to wrap up with here in terms of tips.
Yeah, and so you're right, Mark. And there's some circumstances where IRCC will actually say, sometimes it's possible for a family member to obtain that police certificate because sometimes it's not possible if you're outside the country to obtain it. So you actually have to do like a statutory declaration or a notarized authorization for a family member to go in person to that foreign, either the embassy or maybe the local police or the federal police in order to make that request for the police certificate. But make sure to follow those instructions carefully. And when Mark was talking about Igor's example, and he did say there was a right of appeal. It's important that that was actually in the spousal case.
Yeah.
And so the only reason that they had a right of appeal was because it
Yeah.
was a spousal sponsorship, and that was the context for the police certificate. And the problem, of course, with express entry is there's no recourse, right?
No.
Other than doing a judicial review and saying, there's an administrative error, there's no recourse if you get this wrong. And so it is so important to be basically paranoid about your police certificates.
Absolutely. And just in our last little tip, I want to draw your attention to this instruction right here that says that police clearance certificates need to be a scan of the original certificates in color. Okay. And of course, anything that is not in English or French needs to be translated. That's another issue that you need to pay close attention to. But this requirement that they be in color, I learned the hard way, because we, as probably about 6 years ago now, maybe 7 years ago, I had a paralegal who accidentally printed off these police clearance certificates that were bundled in the same document. Back in that day, we didn't have a good Adobe or other PDF program to separate them out. She printed them in black and white and then scanned them back in separately as separate documents to be uploaded. And she didn't realize, and I never caught it. And so the application was returned because the German police certificate was not in color. So be aware of that for sure. All right.
The last thing that I'm going to say just on that point too is that you're right. If it is a police certificate in a different language, it needs to have a proper certified translation. But a lot of people, sometimes the translators will like stamp the copy, and so you'll get the certified translation with the stamped translation of what the translator was working with, but they forget to include the original copy that doesn't have any marks or stamps or anything from the translator, and that'll get your application returned too.
Absolutely. So just a reminder, everyone, if you're like, oh my goodness, how do I remember all this stuff? There's so many moving parts. Lesson 46, yes, of a slew of lessons, I think I have over 70 in the Express Entry Accelerator, has a detailed video that talks about all of this. In this case, the video is 25 minutes alone, just explaining police clearance certificates. And there's instructions and guidance. And in addition to everything here that we have within the Express Entry Accelerator, you can see there's over 70 lessons. We have our masterclass, which I'm doing tonight, actually, February the 26th, the time of our recording. I have a masterclass every 2 weeks where you can come and join me. And it's different than our live Q&As, which we're late for, Alicia and I, right now, as we're recording this. We got to get over there. But absolutely, this is designed to help you guys navigate your way through so that you do not make the same mistakes that so many other people make. And all you have to do is click on the link, and you can go to the courses, and the link that we have below will take you right here where you can get more information about the entire application, how it's structured. So pay attention to that, and we welcome you to subscribe or reach out to us directly at Holthe Immigration Law, and we can help you with your express entry applications. All right, Alicia, let's wrap it up here. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again in our next podcast series, Express Entry, Getting It Right.